that brings us to pedigrees. So pedigrees are awesome because they can show an entire family how one particular trait is inherited. Okay, so they can be used to study how one specific trait is inherited. So a pedigree is simply a drawing or a diagram, and it shows how one trait is inherited over several generations. Okay, generation would be like, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. It just depends on how big the pedigree is. So, it can also be called a graphic representation of a family tree. So you will see several generations with a pedigree. And this is helpful to look for genetic disorders, to find out if you are a carrier or if your children have a possibility of getting the genetic disorder. Now, when you're looking at pedigrees, it's important to understand that a genetic trait that is in every generation is dominant. Okay? And if it skips a generation, then it is recessive. Okay, you will have to identify if it is a dominant trait or a recessive trait. So what you look for is, does it skip a generation for that? So you can determine lots of things from a pedigree. You also are going to have to look at if it is an autosomal or a sex-linked trait. Remember, your autosomes are your 22 pair of chromosomes that do not affect the gender. And then your sex chromosomes, you only have 2 of those, XX if you're a girl, XY if you're a boy. Okay, so an autosomal trait, what that says down here is an autosomal does not involve your sex chromosomes. Okay, so an autosomal trait is going to appear in both genders, both sexes equally. Okay, so autosomal, you will not have more males than females. Might not be exactly 50%, but it won't be just overbearing amount. And you'll see when we look at the sex-linked pedigrees how you have an overwhelming more amount of males with a sex-linked trait than females. Okay, so looking at a pedigree. Okay, so this is actually a sex-linked or X-linked recessive inheritance, and that's because your sex chromosomes are XX and XY. So it's going to be on the X. If you recall looking at karyotypes, the X is much larger than the Y, so it carries more genetic information. It carries a lot of genetic diseases or the normal gene for that disease. So a lot of times they're called X-linked because it's found on the X. So males, if you have one X, you either got it or you don't if you're a male. Females, these are usually recessive, so you would have to have it on both X's. So you'd have to get it from both parents for the female to have the disease. And so that's why it's more common for in a pedigree for males to have more often with sex-linked if it's on the sex chromosomes. So anyway, this is how you're looking at a pedigree. So this is a pedigree. First off, you have squares and circles. Okay, so the squares are the boys. So if you look, we've highlighted there are 7 boys here. Then you have your circles, which are your females, your girls, and there are 7 females. Okay, and then if it's shaded in, then that means they have the trait. So in this particular pedigree, you have 2 that have it, the blue ones. So this one and this one are going to have the trait. Okay, a horizontal line means they're married. Okay, so number 1 and number 2 in generation 1 are married. Number 1 and number 2 in generation 2. See your generations over here? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so these 2, number 3 and 4 in generation 2 are married. And number 5 and 6 are married. Okay, how many generations do you have? We just went over that. You have 3. Generation 1, 2, 3. Vertical lines mean these are your kids. Okay, so here you have a vertical line. So this number 1, this dad and this mom married, had kids. So this is a child, this is a child, this is a child. Okay, so this person married in. Number 6 married in, number 4 married in, number 1 married in. So they're not genetically related to generation 1. Okay, so here's a pedigree let's take a look at. Now, in this particular pedigree, you really in any pedigree you need to take a look at the key. Okay, so you got a key here, and that shows me that the crossed out ones are dead, but they're still relative to if the person has the disease or not. Okay, so if I look at this pedigree, the first thing I notice is that only males have this disease. Okay, there are no females that are affected. So automatically, I know that this is a sex-linked or X-linked disease. Okay, so what I like to do with these pedigrees is I like to go through and I like to write their genotypes. Okay, so how a sex-linked disease is going to appear is you can do it a couple different ways. You can say, you can put like a apostrophe, and so if you have the apostrophe, you have the disease. Or the way I like to do it is like this. Okay, so in this case, this is going to be also a sex-linked, but it's also going to be recessive. I think I'll have to double check. Let me look at it for a second. Yes, it's recessive. And the reason why I know it's recessive is because it skips a generation. Okay, it actually skips multiple generations. Okay, so if you look here, we've got 2 children with the disease. Neither parent had it, neither grandparent had it. So it skipped 2 generations there. You have a child here with the disease. Parent did not have it, grandparents did not have it. Okay, so here you have someone with the disease, neither parent had it. Here's someone with the disease, neither parent had it. So it skips a generation. It skips a generation here, it skips here, and then you had kids with it. Okay, in all these cases, you had kids with it. So that's how I know it's recessive. Okay, so the little d's in this case would be diseased. Big D, little d would be a carrier. Okay, so they would be normal, but they carry the disease. And then big D would be totally normal. They're free of the disease. Okay, so going back on interpreting this pedigree, I'm going to clean it up a little bit for us to look at. Let me write on it some more. Okay, so what I like to do is I also like to make myself a key. Again, these are very helpful. Okay, so if I'm a female, let's do it this way. If I'm a female, I could be big D, big D, big D, little d, or little d, little d. Okay, so I got to put my sex chromosomes XX because they're female, but then I also have to put whether each X has the disease or not. Okay, so this will be a normal female. That will be the phenotype. This would be a carrier female. So they do not have the disease, but they carry it. That means they could pass it to their children. And this would be a diseased female. And then for males, there's only 2 options. Okay, you either have it or you don't. Okay, so big D is going to be a normal male. And little d, diseased. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to go through and put the genotypes on all these people. So the males are the easiest. They're either shaded in or they're not. Okay, so all my shaded in males, they're going to have a little d. Now you don't have to do the whole thing. If depending on what the question is asking, most of the time you don't need the whole thing filled in. So now I'm going to go through and do all the males that are normal. Because again, males are kind of easy if you're looking at a sex-linked one, because they either have it or they don't. They're either shaded in or they're not. Now you look at all these females. Now, let's look at some of the easy females first. Okay, let's look at this female right here. Okay? All right, first off, she's female, so we know she's XX. She also does not have the disease, so we know she has at least one big D, a normal D. But look at her parents, okay? So her mom, her dad only has one X little d. So that means she has to have a little d from dad. She would have got little d from dad and a normal d from her mom. Okay, so now let's look at her mom. Her mom is normal, so we know she has at least one big D. Okay, what about this other D? Where do boys get their X from? Boys get their X from their mother. Their dad gives them the Y. So this boy here got a diseased D from the mom. So this mom would be a carrier. So the mom and the daughter here would be a carrier. Now, let's look at grandpa and grandma. Grandpa and grandma are up here. Okay, so grandpa does not have it. So none of this came from grandpa. Let's look at grandma. Grandma's normal, but she had 2 children, male children with it. So that means she must be carrying a diseased X. So she's a carrier. She was normal, but she did not have it. Okay, now let's look here at this girl. Okay, so this girl, again, XX, she has a big D because she's normal. Look at her kid. Okay, she has 1 male child with the disease here. Okay, so that means she must have a diseased X. Okay, look at their daughter here, right here, this girl. This girl is trouble, I'm going to tell you. Okay, this girl is trouble. Okay, we know she's normal. Okay, but she could have got the normal X from her dad. That's all dad had to give was a normal X. So we don't know what her other X is. Okay, because mom could have given either one of these. We would have to wait till this daughter had children to know. Okay, so look at this girl. This girl here. Okay, so again, she's X, big D. Look at dad. Dad has to give her a diseased X. So she is a carrier. Mom, we don't know because mom married in. We know mom is X, big D, but we don't know the other one because we can't see mom's genetics. All right, look over here. So we know this dad is normal. Okay, what about this mom right here? Okay, so we know she's normal. She's got 1 X big D, but she had 2 male children with it. Okay, they had to get that little D from somewhere, so there she is. So looking, you might see it half shaded as a carrier. Okay, you might see it like that. That's very easy to analyze in that case. Then let's look at this girl, our very last girl here. Okay, we know she's normal, X big D, which could have came from dad. We don't know which one she got from mom. She could have got the big D or the little d. Okay, so now we've looked at the whole pedigree. And we've analyzed what we can analyze. So again, you don't have to do it this way. What if the question says this? Individual 1 in generation 1, 2, are they a carrier? Okay, well then that 1, 2, that would be Momo. Okay, that would be way up here, Momo. Is she a carrier? Okay, well first thing I'd look at, is it sex linked? Yes it is, because there's more males. Is it recessive? Yes, because you only have carriers in recessive diseases. If it's dominant, there's no carriers. Okay, if it's dominant, you have the disease. If you have a dominant letter, there is no carrying. Okay, so okay, it's recessive, it's sex linked, so she could be a carrier. Let's look at it. Does she have any children with it? Because her husband is normal. Does she have children with it? Yes, so she must have been a carrier. So you might not have had to do all this stuff that we just did. Actually, you're pretty much never going to have to do all this. It's going to ask you a targeted question about the specific individual. You just need to be able to analyze it. Okay, looking at this one. So first thing I got to figure out is if it's sex-linked or autosomal, and if it's dominant or recessive. Okay, so my first observation is I'm going to count the boys. So I have 1, 2, 3 boys and 1, 2, 3, 4 girls with it. And so with sex link, you'll have many more boys. You might have a girl with it, but it's not very common. In this case, you have more girls than boys. So this is going to be an autosomal disease because it's close to equal. Okay, then we have to figure out if it's dominant or recessive. Well, I told you if it's dominant or recessive, then it's going to skip a generation. Okay, so let's see if it skips anywhere. Okay, so we see it in generation 1. Okay, we see it in generation 2. So it shows up there and there again. Okay. All right, let's look at this. This kid didn't have it. This kid had it. That's that end of that line. And then this kid end of that line. They didn't have it. And then this one had it and then had it again. Okay, so it didn't actually ever skip a generation. So this is going to be a autosomal dominant. Okay, when I say it skips a generation, I'm saying that there's a case where a child had it, but the parents did not. So, for example, if one of these kids had it, but the two parents did not, that would mean it would skip a generation. Okay, so anyway, now that we've figured out that it's autosomal dominant, I can take a look at it. So if it's autosomal and it's dominant, then I'm going to use letters, normal letters. Big D, little big D, little d, little d, little d. Because it's autosomal, I don't have to use XX and XY. Okay? So because it's dominant, they either have the disease, because it's big D's dominant, or they don't have the disease. Okay? If this was a recessive disease and it was autosomal, then this would be the disease. Okay, this would be normal or free of the disease, and this would be a carrier. Okay, so you only have carriers with recessives. Just going to erase that because we're not talking about that right now. So again, it helps you to make a key like this. Okay, so in analyzing this, let's see. Where does individual 2, do they have the disease or not? No, because they're not shaded in. Okay. All right. So what about individual 2, 1? What's their phenotype? Okay. Well, you know that they're going to have a big D, right? Okay. Let's look at their parents. So he's got at least one big D. She's little d, little d. So he must be heterozygous, because mom is little d, little d. So what I can do is I can go through and mark little d on everyone that does not have it. Okay, and then I can look at the children here. Okay, so this is one of their kids. Okay, they're little d. So one of those little d's must have come from dad, because you get one from each parent. So that means all their children between this cross are either going to be heterozygous or homozygous recessive. Okay, so these will all be homozygous recessive because they're children from generation 1. Okay, now let's take a look. This individual. Okay, big D because they have disease, little d from mom. Okay, this individual, big D because they have the disease, mom had dad had little d's. Okay, so they're heterozygous. Big D because they have disease, again, dad had little d's. So I was able to easily answer every single genotype for this one. Again, you don't have to do all of these, but it is helpful just for me to show you how to do this, just to get started with it. But again, the questions might be, okay, individual 3, 3. So 3, 3. What is their genotype? You know, the question could be as simple as that. And so you don't have to you would only have to look at that particular line. You wouldn't have to look at everybody. Okay, so looking at this particular pedigree. Okay, so again, the first thing I need to look for is if it's sex-linked or autosomal. So I see 3 males and 1 female. Okay, if it was all males, I would automatically know that it was sex-linked, but it's not. I need to look at this female and see, is it possible? Okay, so as we talked about before, well, first off, I can look and see it's recessive. I can see it's recessive because I have someone that does not have it, and then they have a kid with it. Okay, so it skips a generation right here. So it's definitely, recessive. Okay, so knowing that it's recessive, now I'm going to look at this female because we got to figure her out. So if it was sex linked, she would be XX, and we already decided it was recessive. So for her to have it, she'd have to have little d, little d. Okay, so look at her daddy. Her dad, if this was sex linked, she would have had to have gotten a affected allele from both her mother and her father. Okay, so look at her dad. Her dad does have the disease, so that's a possibility. Look at her mom. Her mom is normal. We don't know what the other X is. Let's see if we can figure it out. Well, is it possible for mom to have a male child with the disease? Yes, because he would be X little dy. Okay, so because she has a brother with the disease, then the mom could be a carrier, which means that the mom could have a female with the disease. So this is sex linked. So now that we figured out it's sex linked recessive, I can go through and I can figure out everybody else's genotypes. Just going to erase all those little marks. Okay, so we already figured out that she is a carrier. He has it. He has it. She has it. He has it. Okay, so he must be normal, normal, normal male. Okay, the rest of these are females. Okay, so looking up here, so we have X big D, X. She had to have gotten an affected allele from her dad, so she's a carrier. So she would be a carrier. Okay, so this is normal. We don't know the other one. Normal had to have gotten an affected allele from dad, so she's a carrier. Again, all the females born from this male are going to be carriers. Okay, but we don't know what mom is here. Now, we have a carrier female here with a normal male. Okay, so her kids here, she's got a female. She would have gave the dad would have gave the normal X. We don't know what mom gave. Okay, same thing. Dad gave the normal X. We don't know what mom gave. We don't know. Okay, we know that mom gave him an affected X, right? So that's how we know he got an affected X, so he would have gotten it from mama. Okay, now let's look at this one. Here is a normal female, but her dad has an affected X, so she will be a carrier. Same thing, dad has an affected X, she's normal, so she will also be a carrier. So I'm just going to half shade them in for you to see our carriers. So anyway, like I said, you can have lots of different questions on this, but you need to be able to interpret the whole thing. Okay, looking at this one, I have 1, 2, whoa, hang on. We got to get it where we can see it all. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 males and 0 females. So is this sex linked or autosomal? Well, hopefully you picked that it is sex linked. Now, is it dominant or recessive? Well, we skipped a generation right here, and then we had 2 kids with it. We skipped another generation here and here. Okay, so this is definitely recessive. So sex-linked recessive. So we'll go through, clean this up a little bit, analyze everything. Okay, so if it's sex-linked, remember boys either have it or they don't. It's recessive, so the little D has the disease. And the big D does not have it. And then for female, you're either a normal female, so big D, a carrier female, or a diseased female. So you'd have to have it from both parents if you're a diseased female. Diseased male gets it from mama. Thanks, Mom. Okay, so going in, filling in all my males, because they either have it or they don't. They're either shaded in or they're not. okay? And then, or females. We have no females with the disease, so they're going to be complicated, but not that complicated. All right, so all these females are going to have X big D because they're normal. Okay, so let's look at her. Does she have any kids with the disease? Yes, she does. She has this guy and this guy. So that means they got their affected allele, their affected diseased X from their mama. So she must be a carrier. Okay, now let's go to this individual 2-2. So her. Okay, again, she's normal. Okay, look at her kids. She has a male with the disease, so that means she's a carrier. Okay, look at this girl right here. Okay, she's a carrier because her daddy gave her an affected X. So she's normal, but daddy gave her an affected X. Okay, this woman, she's normal. She's also going to be a carrier, though, because she has a affected son. Okay, here, this girl, Dad gave her a normal X. We don't know what Mom gave her, so we do not know about her. This girl, normal. She married in. All we can see is that she had a normal daughter. This normal daughter will have an affected X from her daddy, but we do not know about this woman. Looking at this woman, she's normal, but she had 2 male children with the disease, so she's going to be a carrier. This girl got a normal X from Dad. We don't know what she got from Mom. Okay, so this is just getting into the whole autosomal versus sex-linked thing. So every chromosome has genes for particular traits. So you have 46 chromosomes, 23 pair. 22 of those pair are autosomes. So autosomes are any chromosome that's not a sex chromosome. So all these diseases, these pedigrees that we've been looking at that occur on the autosomes versus the sex chromosomes, and that's going to make it different, affect people different. So remember your homologous chromosomes, you get one from Mom and one from Dad. So you get 23 chromosomes from your mom, 23 from your dad. And that's what we have to look at, what each parent gave you. So your homologous chromosome, you're going to get 1 gene from Mom, 1 gene from Dad. And so it might be a diseased gene, it might be a normal gene, or it might be 2 normals or 2 diseased. Okay, so this is just reviewing a karyotype. So this is looking at your 22 autosomes, and then your sex chromosomes at the end, showing you that the X and the Y are different looking. The Y does not have as much genetic information on it. Okay, so again, your 23rd pair are your sex chromosomes. And so your sex-linked traits are going to be usually on the X chromosome. So this is why you see it more often in males, because males only have 1 X. So that means they either have it or they don't, and they always get it from their mother if it's an X-linked disease. Females, most of these are recessive, so you would have to get it from both parents, and it would have to be on both of your X's if you were to have that sex-linked disorder. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. How many pairs are sex chromosomes? Well, if it's a sex chromosome, it's either XX or XY, one or the other. So that would mean you have, in your body, if you're a female, you have 1 pair. In your body, if you're a male, you have 1 pair, because a pair is 2. So it would be 1. So again, if your trait is sex-linked, it's going to be seen usually only in males. It's not only in males, but it's usually most often in males. If it's usually very, very clear, a very large amount of males versus females. And again, most of these are going to be recessive because your boys only have 1 X chromosome, and that is going to come from the mother. The Y comes from the father. So anyway, a female who carries the recessive allele on 1 X is going to be considered a carrier. She only gets the recessive disease if she gets it from both parents. Both alleles have it. Now, getting into more complicated genetics. Most traits are not simple dominant recessive alleles. Okay, so simple dominant and recessive is called Mendelian genetics because that's what Gregor Mendel studied. So non-Mendelian genetics is going to be the things we're getting into now. Okay, and here is one more pedigree. Actually, we already looked at this. Sorry, it's a duplicate. Okay, so this will be the start of non-Mendelian genetics. So, like I said before, non-Mendelian genetics is going to be genetics that's not your typical dominant and recessive. So these would not be your typical Punnett squares. So the first thing we're going to talk about is not something that we normally do Punnett squares on, but it is a term that you need to be able to recognize because most human traits fall in this category. It's called polygenetic or polygenic inheritance or traits. Okay, so poly means many, and genetic or genic means genes. So you might see that spelled either way, polygenetic or polygenic. And it's the same thing. It's going to be a trait that is controlled or that has 2 or more genes. So like I said, most human traits are polygenic. And so this is where you get into multiple different eye colors and hair colors. So for example, you have brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes, and then a lot of kind of like mixtures between those and different shades of those colors. And so that's because it's not just one gene. If it was one gene, there would only be 2 colors. But there's more than 2 colors, and there's more than two or more genes that are going to control that. Same thing with hair color. You know, there's blonde, there's brown, there's red, there's even black. So you have like all these different hair colors and then all these different variations. You have different variations of red, different variations of brown, black, blonde. So anyway, these genes sometimes can be on the same chromosome or on different chromosomes. And they might have 2 or more alleles. So they might be multiple alleles, which we'll get into soon. So anyway, eye color, height, weight, hair, skin color, these are all considered polygenic traits for humans. Skin color is another one. There's people that have red undertones or pink undertones to their skin, and then there's people who have like more olive undertones to their skin, and then of course you have all the different variations, you know, from extremely light skinned and to dark skinned, and everything in between. So anyway, all these characteristics are going to have degrees of intermediate conditions. So they can go from one extreme to the other. And it's intermediate because you have multiple traits working together. So a great example of this would be if you have a light-skinned person marrying a dark-skinned person. Usually the children will have in the middle, somewhere in the middle, skin color, but they could have one that's on one end of the spectrum and one that's on the other end of the spectrum. So anyway, one example I like to give of this is a personal example of mine is my family's height. So I'm going to make a space here for me to draw on. So as far as my family goes, I'm just going to draw like a number line kind of thing. Okay, so my grandmother on my mom's side, she's 5 foot tall. Okay, she's just 5 foot even. Her husband, my grandfather, was 6'4". My other grandfather was 6'2", and his wife, my other grandmother, was 5'9". So my mom is about 5'5". My dad is 5'10". Okay. So when we get into talking about myself and my brothers, okay, so we'll do black is grandparents. This is my genetics now. Yellow is my parents. Okay, we're going to make blue my brothers. I have two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. And then the red is going to be me. Okay, so I'm 5'9". My younger brother is 6'1". And my older brother is 6'4". So, if you take a look at our grandparents, you'll see that, I have one grandparent on one end of the spectrum and another grandparent on the other end of the spectrum. But I have three of my four grandparents are on the tall side. So it makes sense why, I'm the shortest of my siblings at 5'9", which females tend to be shorter than males anyway. But my older brother, he is, the tallest. So the only other person as tall as him in my whole family was my grandfather. Everyone else is shorter than my older brother. So anyway, this is just going to show you that, people could fall anywhere on this spectrum. My cousin, she is like 5'1". So she fell on that end of the spectrum. But if you looked at her parents and her other side of her family, the side of the family we do not share, they tend to be shorter rather than on the taller end. So this is an example of polygenetic traits. So myself, I could have landed anywhere between 5 foot tall or 6'4" because that's in my past genetics. You looked at my past genetics, my parents and grandparents, then, they could account for that height difference. Same thing goes with red hair. A lot of people will not have a lot of red-haired people in their family. And so if you look back, sometimes it's an aunt that might have it. But you can find someone with that gene at some point. My friend, my cousin, the one who's 5'1", let me tell you about her family. So her family, so she herself hang on, I don't know why this isn't working right. So my cousin, she has dark hair, dark eyes, and she's really tan, dark complected. And her husband has blue eyes, he has red hair, and he's very light complected, very light skin. So you have her husband. Okay, so he has red hair, blue eyes, and very light complexion, very light skin. And then my cousin, I'll put a dress on her. Okay, she has brown hair, brown eyes, and she's very tan. Very tan complexion. Okay, they've had 2 kids. So baby number 1, he's a little boy. Looks just like his mama. Okay, so he has brown hair, brown eyes. He's very tan. Baby number 2, little girl, looks just like her daddy. She has red hair, blue eyes, and very light complected. Okay, so these two kids, they do not look like they could be siblings at all. But the daughter, she looks like the dad, and the son looks like the mom, and they have very different genetic traits. I'll have to get y'all a picture of them and get her permission. But to me, it's just crazy how the baby, the new baby, the girl, doesn't look anything like the mom, and the boy doesn't look anything like the dad. It's a great case of genetics. Anyway.